How did November both simultaneously feel like the middle of it doesn't exist, but also that Halloween was 85 years ago? Hi everyone, my name is Maddie and welcome back to my channel, where today I'm going to be doing my November wrap-up video. I've been doing pretty solid so far this year, where I've read about 13 or 14 books each month. Not this month. That didn't happen. I'll probably get into it a little bit more as the video goes on. I read 7 books this month, which isn't terrible. I'm hoping to read a little bit more in December, especially after this week once I'm finished up with the rest of my essays, and then hopefully I can finish up my last exam. And then I have, I think, a solid week at least until I go home, so I'll probably have lots of time that I'm kicking around here looking for something to do, and we'll probably get some reading done then. So, without further ado, what did I read this month? So the very first thing that I read this month was another webcomic, which is called Check Please. So I read the entirety of the webcomic, which is split up into 2 graphic novels, the first one being Hockey, and then the second one being called Sticks and Stones. And this follows, I just realized I'm trying to remember the main character's name that is not his nickname. Eric, that's his name. They all call him Biddle, because I think that's his last name is Biddle and they call him Little? See, this is what I mean. Like, October felt like eons ago, and I was reading this, like, literally November 1st. But yes, it follows this main character, Eric, who is a hockey player, and it goes through his 4 years at university as he is part of the hockey team, and as he kind of finds himself and falls in love. He's also a baking enthusiast, which is a big thing throughout the book. He is constantly baking pies and scones, and he stress bakes a lot too, which I can relate to. There's a scene where his roommates are literally like dragging him away from the oven that they've unplugged, and they're like, no, you need to go and work on your thesis. This is ridiculous. But yes, so it is a queer hockey story, I guess is the best way to explain it, which is kind of interesting. It's something that the author said that she wanted to kind of explore and look into more. As a Canadian, I don't think every Canadian likes hockey, but I grew up with my brother playing hockey, and I used to hate going to the arena to watch him. I would just like play on my Game Boy or color pictures. But as I got older, I really started to appreciate the game. I love watching hockey. I find it really interesting. It's so fast-paced. It's incredible. I don't watch NHL as much as I used to, but in middle school I used to watch it a ton. So that was the only thing that threw me off a little bit in this comic, is the Stanley Cup and the NHL exists, but the teams aren't the real NHL team names. I'm not sure if that's like a copyright issue or not. But reading it, I had to keep reminding myself that one of the players is on an NHL team, because the name kept throwing me off and I just kept assuming that it was another one of these university teams. They also have these like little interludes where the characters like explain hockey terminology to you, which I really appreciated and I found really funny, because a lot of those terms are things that like I just know off the top of my head, and then I'm like, oh right, this isn't a normal thing for people to know. It was very wholesome, very well done. I would have liked a little bit more depth and explanation into some of the characters, but yes, there was a lot of stuff with Jack and Jack's past that I would have kind of wished that they went into a little bit more. There was a lot of things that they alluded to that they didn't necessarily explore, maybe just because I'm a sucker for some good emotional turmoil, complicated backstory, I don't know, but I would have loved to hear a little bit more about that. Also, there is a scene in the comic when someone proposes to someone and they put the ring on the wrong finger, and I can't unsee it now. Every time I go back, I'm like, that's the wrong finger on that hand. And it really bothers me, but that's completely unrelated to the review. I can't remember if I gave them 4 or 5 stars, but it is a really good read. It's really interesting, and it also does a lot of really interesting conversations about representation and what that means. So Eric is a vlogger as well, or YouTuber. That's what he does a lot of his baking videos on, so a lot of kind of his inner monologues is told through those vlogs. And it's really interesting because for him, being out is a way to show people that that's something that's possible, that you can like be gay and be a professional hockey player, which is really interesting. But there are other characters in the comic that deal with it a little bit differently, but there is some interesting pieces around like the media frenzy and things like that, and the way that it stops becoming about the game and what you want to talk about and ends up becoming this almost like tokenist conversation about being an openly gay hockey player. So I think that was really unique to see a lot of that explored throughout sports, especially because that doesn't get talked about. And I actually did some research, and I'm pretty sure there hasn't been an openly gay player in the NHL. So it was interesting to do a little bit of research after that and read a little bit more about hockey culture and athletics and everything, and to have this story that writes a different narrative and presents that in a different way was a really good read. I would definitely recommend checking it out. I know the second volume is up for Goodreads Choice Awards, so if you're someone who likes to follow along with the books that are on that, this is one for you to check out. After that, I read Things We Lost in the Fire, which is by Marlene Enriquez, and she is a Argentinian author, I believe. So the book has been translated from Spanish into English, and it is a collection of, I guess, like horror short stories. I enjoyed it. I find with any short story collection, I enjoy some more than others, but I do have to say that this book was very consistent in its quality across the stories. Like, I seem to enjoy all of them about the same. A lot of the horror in this comes from, like, the unknown. A lot of the short stories end without giving you any kind of answer or something to understand what, like, supernatural phenomenon was going on, which I didn't mind, but I would personally like a little bit more information. I think some of those open-ended endings work a little bit better within the short story context, which I think is why she made some of that decision. But ultimately, a lot of the book is about the state of the government and the state of like her country, and using horror as a catalyst to explore what has been going on there, which I think is really interesting. Like the title story, Things We Lost in the Fire, is the story about women who start setting themselves on fire, just kind of like as this statement and reclamation of self, which is scary, but also really fascinating in the way that it's explored and explained in the story. I think really good horror isn't just scaring you with like some sort of ghoul or undead thing. There's something underlying to it. I did watch The Train to Busan at the end of October, and that like horror film is another one that underlying the horror is like these themes of like classism and privilege and all these different other stories that end up actually like being more scary and more of a social critique than the actual zombies in the film. And I think this book is very similar in that regard, where there is some really freaky stuff going on, but maybe what's actually happening underlying the freaky stuff that's a little bit closer to reality is more terrifying. So after I read that book, I don't know if these are in order on my Goodreads. My Goodreads read thing is being a little bit weird, but I'm just gonna go with the order I wrote them down in. They all got read in November. Is Cemetery Boys, which is by Aiden Thomas, and I loved this book. I was so excited to read it. I had been waiting to get it for forever, so once I finally got it, I was super excited. I was actually supposed to go and hang out with a friend, and I almost missed hanging out with them because they had texted me, and I was so engrossed in finishing the book that I didn't realize that it was like the time that we were supposed to meet up. So if that's not a good review, I don't know what else to tell you. I did do a wrap-up review of it, which I will link here in the cards if you want to read it. This book follows Yadriel, who is a trans teen, and he lives within this, I guess, Latinx community of, I guess, witches. So there's brujos and brujas, and I think the direct translation of that to English is a witch, and the brujos is the male role, and the brujas is the female role. So he wants to prove himself as a real brujo as he's transitioned, but his family won't let him do like the kinses or the ceremonies that he needs to do, so he decides that he's going to do them himself. And then following the murder of one of his cousins, he is trying to help them find this ghost to prove prove his identity, and ends up raising somebody else from the dead who happens to be a teenager from his school. And then, of course, things kind of escalate from there. There's a little bit of romance sprinkled in, and of course, the longer that Julian, this ghost, is around, the less that he wants him to leave. The system of magic within this book is incredibly well written. I won't talk too much more about it because I do have that video, but yes, the fantasy, the magic within this book is written, the romance and everything is really sweet, and of course it's a great book for representation, trans representation, queer representation, gay representation, but also the fact that the author, it's an Own Voices story, and they were the first openly trans author, I think, to make the New York Times bestseller list, which is absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, it's a really good book. Check it out, read it. It's amazing. I can't recommend it more. I think it's probably one of my favorites that I've read so far this year. So after Cemetery Roys, I read the book Sisters by Daisy Johnson, and this follows two sisters. I believe their names are September and July. One of them, they were born 10 months apart from one another, so September is the oldest of the two of them, and it's a kind of a weird book. I'm trying to think of how to explain it. Basically, something has happened and they've moved to this new house, and July can't really remember what happened, and she's trying to like piece it all together, but her and September are essentially inseparable, and she would do anything for her, and she's trying to figure out what anything means and where that line may have been drawn, because there's definitely something in her past that she can't remember. The twist at the end of this book I thought was a little bit predictable. It's kind of been done before, but I did think some of the bonds between the siblings was quite interesting, especially their mother isn't really... She struggles with depression, I think, so she's not really a present figure in their life, and also just some of the circumstances that's happened in like her past and her life makes her not able to be the most there for them. So as like the book goes on and some of these things start to get explored a little bit more, you learn a lot more about that. There is a little bit of an underlying kind of supernatural element with these things that are starting to happen to July that she doesn't really understand. And some of that, like, I guess, like, twin sense in a way, even though they are born, like, they are a year apart, but they're so close together that they're basically twins. Yeah, it wasn't a bad, it was fairly short, 150 pages. I thought it was going to be a little bit longer, but it wasn't a bad read. Just wasn't personally one of my favorites. I wasn't really, like, hooked or riveted as I was reading it, but I think I gave it 3 stars, so if you want to check it out, feel free to check it out. After that, I got my copy of This Winter by Alice Oseman in the mail, and if you've been following this channel for a while, you'll know that I've already read this book, but she re-released and re-edited it so that it lines up better with what has been happening in the graphic novel Heartstopper. It follows the Spring siblings, so Tori, Oliver, and Charlie. Tori is the eldest, and she is the main character in Alice Oseman's book Solitaire, and then Charlie is one of the main characters in the graphic novel Heartstopper that she has written. And this story, I can now figure out where it takes place because Heartstopper just updated recently. So this takes place between chapters 5 and 6 in Heartstopper. So it's after Charlie's had like a really difficult year. There's been a lot of stuff going on with these Spring siblings, and essentially it's Christmas, and it's like, what does that mean for them this year? I don't want to get into it too much more without spoiling Solitaire or Heartstopper if you want to go and check it out, but the book is told in 3 sections, and it starts with Tori, and then it goes to Charlie, and then it ends with Oliver, who is their younger sibling. The published copy has lovely, lovely art in it, which is wonderful. It is also really nice to read some of the updates, just because when I read This Winter, there's a lot of things that I was confused about. Nick, who is Charlie's boyfriend, has a dog, Nellie, and in the original This Winter, he gets a new dog, Henry, who is this pug, but there's no mention of where Nellie is. And I was so scared that Nellie was gonna die because that dog is so pure and one of my favorite things about the comic that I was like terrified that she was just gonna disappear at some point. And it turned out that that was something that she fixed in this so that Nellie and Henry both exist within this. And that was something that just came out in the update that was just posted today of Heartstopper. It was the first time that you actually see Henry the pug. And she posted on Tumblr being like, okay, everyone can stop asking me if Nellie's dead now. Because of that early publication of this winter, I think a lot of people were really confused. So that's why I think she's done a lot of those updates just so that everything lines up a little bit more, and she's fixed, I don't want to say fixed, but she's kind of tweaked some of the representation of some of the like minor characters that show up in this book, which I think is really interesting and provides a different kind of representation. So yes, you all know I love Alice Oseman. I will rant about her until the end of time, so feel free to check this out. I think the ebook copy should be updated to be the new version as well with the art if that's how you prefer to read it. Okay, this is where things start to go hokey. So I think I hadn't read a book for like a week, and then within the span of like 2 days, I read the entirety of The City We Became, which is by N.K. Jemisin. I probably won't talk about this a lot because I did film a very chaotic, I might refilm it, review of this book, so that will be coming out soon. I'll probably go back to this video once that's up and link it here. But this book follows, it's like a sci-fi fantasy book, and essentially cities are born, and then when they are born there's like an avatar that represents them. In the case of New York, which is where this book takes place, the avatar is born but ends up splitting. So there's the main avatar, and then there are 5 other representations of the city that are each of the 5 boroughs. The characterization in this book is phenomenal, the diversity in this book is phenomenal, the sci-fi and fantasy elements of the book are really interesting. With some of the lore and the characters finding each other, it can get a little bit slow at the middle sometimes, but because the characters are interesting and the world is interesting, that keeps pulling you forward. It is the first book in a trilogy. I haven't heard any announcements for what the plot is going to be in the other 2, because I'm very interested in whether they're going to carry over the plot from this book into the next 2 with the same characters, or if it's going to shift to different cities in the next one. But yes, the idea of having like the personification of a community within a person was just so fascinating to me, and you can tell the amount of research and knowledge that went into her decision of who was going to represent each borough was fascinating. It's also, I think I talk about this in my wrap-up, one of the first books that I think I've ever read that's by a non-Indigenous author that just has an Indigenous character who's just a person, which, damn, I didn't know I needed that representation in my life until I read this. And then I had the shocking realization that unless it's a book explicitly about Indigenous people or by an Indigenous author, I don't think I've ever read a book that just has an Indigenous character in it. So that gives you an idea of how bad that representation is. But yes, this book does a brilliant job. The research that she put into that character, and it's just so many of the other characters just breathe this really amazing, authentic light into them. So I finished this book on the 19th of November, and I have not finished a book since then, which means I haven't read a book in, I guess it's 11 days, which isn't really that bad. Towards the end of the month, I picked up Pet Sematary, and I started reading it, but I was having a really hard time, like, engaging in it and getting myself going. There was also some stuff that kind of went down in my personal life, and I was just like not having the ability to focus on school, let alone reading. So I was reading a lot of fan fiction, because for me personally, I find fan fiction, I can kind of like zone out when I'm reading it. Sometimes with like, there's a lot of great fics that I will read like thoroughly, like engaged with them. But if my like head's not really in the game, because I already know the characters and I already know these like characterizations and understandings of them, even if they're put into different worlds or different scenarios, I can kind of like skim through them without needing like my full mental capacity to understand the context of what is going on. So if there was an option on Goodreads for me to log how much fan fiction I've read this month, I would probably have like another 7 books. I don't know, maybe not. But that's just kind of where my brain was at, so I was doing a lot of like scrolling through a lot of fan fiction throughout the end of this month just so that I could feel like I was reading something, even though I couldn't make myself sit down and read an actual book. And then yesterday I was like, maybe I can get a book done before the end of November, and I picked up In a Holidays by Christina Lauren. I read Autobiography by them this summer, and I was like, okay, I'm not a romance person by any means. I think I liked Autobiography because there was a lot going on in conversations with religion and other stuff that was happening in that book. Because I can do romance as long as it's not the like main feature of the story and there's other stuff going on. and it's like done intelligently. This sounds so mean of me. I got halfway through that book yesterday, and I think in like the last 30 pages that I was reading, I kept like bookmarking it, like slamming it closed and tossing it on the couch about 4 times. Just not my vibe. They made sledding sexual. There's like 2 20-year-olds making out in a closet, and there was the line, "Made my lady parts wave the white flag of surrender," and I decided that was enough for me. So I don't think I'll be finishing that. I might give it to my mom for Christmas, or just give it to her when I get home and be like, here, you might like this, but there's no way that I'm getting it finished. Oh well, if I spent $15 to remember why I don't like romance, I can deal with that. So after that, I've been diving back into Pet Sematary and doing some more reading of that. So hopefully I'll be able to finish that up soon and then dive into getting some more books done before the winter holidays and then doing lots of reading over the winter break. But yes, that's all that I have for you today. I tried to go a little bit more in depth about the books just to keep kind of the time the same. Also, it's a little bit nicer when you don't have like 14 books and you're not like speed running through half of them to make sure that your video isn't 8 hours long. But if you have any recommendations for me to read, please let me know in the comments down below. I got a bunch of books out of the library. A lot of them I had added to my TBR after Trans Awareness Week, because I saw a lot of really great recommendations, so I want to be checking out some of those books. But yes, if you have any recommendations for me, I will have some time to read, hopefully, coming up, so I would love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, my Instagram and blog and Goodreads is all linked down below if you want to follow me there. Please subscribe, like, comment, leave all that good stuff, and ring the bell so you get notifications. And other than that, I will see you lovely people next time.